You may have heard one of these five myths trying to use science and biology against trans people. Myth number one, sex and gender are always the same.
In the past, sex and gender identities have always been viewed as one in the same. But in the last 10 to 15 years, there's been a strong push for, watch this, gender to be separated from the concept of sex.
While often sex and gender do align, it is actually not true that they are the same. I'm here at the mall to show you what I mean. I just got done walking through the mall and I saw over 1,000 people. Based on the fact that there's 0.7% of the US population is trans, I probably 99.9% chance I saw a trans person. Probably not better than 95% chance I saw two. I don't actually know if I saw anyone who was trans today, but every person that I saw fit into a category of either a man or a woman. So who knows? Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. If I struck up a conversation with somebody in the mall today, I would generally know how to treat them as far as like gender is concerned. It might have misread one or two here and there, but like that's the point, isn't it? If their biology and their DNA has nothing to do with how I treat them in society, then gender is a social construct. That's just the reality of it. That brings us to myth number two, which I have come here to the library. I'm in a study room to address the myth that you can't change your gender, which is obviously not correct based on what we've talked about with myth number one. You can change your gender expression, your outward gender expression. So let's change this question of you can't change your gender. Myth number two is really you can't change your sex.
Gender is biologically defined and it's fixed. It's a biological reality. You've either got XY chromosomes or XX chromosomes.
I have this book here. DNA is not destiny. And it has an entire chapter. Like the entire book is about how just like your DNA is not the destiny for who you are. So in a very real sense, the sex of your sex is not like fixed in stone by your DNA. Epigenetics come into play, differences in chemistry in your mother's womb, all those different things come into play that affect different outcomes for those same exact that same exact DNA. The hormone washes and the timing of the hormone washes in the womb is what affects whether or not you express sexually as a male or female. The hormone washes that affects how the brain structures develop actually happen at different times than the genitals. And so you get this situation where your brain structures and your genitals, and I'm vastly oversimplifying this, but your brain structure and your genitals don't match. So what do? Well, you take hormones. This book has an entire chapter called Born This Way, Thinking About Gender and Sexual Orientation. It's all about the complexities of what science has discovered about how your gender and sexual preferences are like on a spectrum. And maybe someday we'll exactly figure out exactly all the different categories for what structures and how people express and all that stuff. But more or less functionally, it's a spectrum right now. And this is the scientific reality. When I came out to my parents, one of the things my parents told me is that every cell in my body is male, which is just completely absurd because that doesn't make any sense. My cells don't have a gender. They have DNA, and that DNA can have chromosomes, but you have to know what the context of what that cell is operating in to know which genes are expressed and what hormones and proteins and other things are like flowing around in the cell to know how it's behaved. Like it's a fact that my skin right now, because I'm on hormone replacement therapy, why can't I say that word, is operating and acting as it would on a female body because my estrogen is my primary hormone right now. This is true of my entire body. Hormone replacement therapy doesn't change the structures that are there, but it makes all of the cells express different behaviors, the typical female behaviors, rather than the male behaviors. And so it's completely absurd to say that you can determine what the sex of a cell is. And there's all sorts of conditions that can have XX males and XY females and a whole bunch of other different combinations of like XXY and so on. And I don't even know what all of them are because there's a lot of A lot of them. The point is that cells don't have sex, the whole body does. And that sex is assigned at birth because the doctors take a look and figure out what your genitals are and what you most likely are, but they're operating from incomplete information. So, and this chapter in this book is all about all of the complexities and the nuance and the things that they've discovered about how your DNA isn't exactly driving everything about what you develop. And it's not true that there is a sex binary that is essential to who you are. It is true that I have developed that as a woman internally, my internal sense. And there was a great quote. Yes. Wait, what? This is a different book. It's just basically a big book on sex and natural history. And so it goes into a whole bunch of biological information, but the entire, I don't know, how many pages is this? Almost 500 pages on just sex. And one of the things that they say in here is that all evidence so far collected by gene hunters, psychobiologists, and anthropologists seems to be telling us that while genes are at the foundation of sex and sex behavior, they don't operate in a vacuum. They are influenced not only by other genes, but also events outside the control of individual animal genes or even whole human populations of genes. Your gender identity is more than your gender role. It includes imagery and unspoken text that may be known to you alone. What does all of this mean? All of this gets back to this point. Cells don't have gender or sex. A whole body has a sexual expression. My sexual expression has changed. My body is behaving differently because the external factors that are being put into my body, namely hormones, are different than when I was born, or what I would normally have in my body based on my sex organs. And that gender identity is very clearly separate and distinct and not always matching your sex. And that is the case with trans people. No matter what you say, you have bogus evidence at best, debunked science, which this sermon is full of. Now, of course, you're objecting that the physical structures that are male in my body that at birth I was AMAB, assigned to male at birth. The physical structures haven't gone away just by taking hormones. I have a few things to say to that. One, you don't actually know what's between the legs of trans people. There's a lot of intersex people as well, and who genitals are ambiguous, so don't make assumptions. That's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is even those structures, those parts of my body that have were developed through the typical male pathways, are acting in ways, those cells, those structures are acting in ways that are different than they used to be because I'm on hormones. And so they behave differently. Also, SRS, sex reassignment surgery, is the thing. So you can change the physical structure, and then it becomes even more typical of how you behave as a woman. Now, I will never have a uterus, which I have mixed feelings about. On balance, I would probably rather have one, but that's not an option for me, unfortunately. At the end of the day, it's true that I will never have a body that is exactly what I would have had I been born as a cis woman, but at the end of the day, that doesn't really matter because gender is not the same as sex, and there's enough aspects of my sex that I can change. I behave in society like my body behaves as a woman's body. It's true. Not exactly the same as a cis woman's, but pretty much a woman's body. I have a woman's body now. That's just true. Facts. So it brings us to myth number 3. Myth number 3 is the idea that intersex people are a variation, but trans people are not.
So intersex people do not invalidate the concept of sex as a generality. Intersex people are people who have a biological anomaly.
Both of these are intersex and transgender people are genetic variations. There are genetic variations involved and developmental variations involved. So while you can't really say that the two of those categories are different, you're being inconsistent with your terms. So if you accept that intersex people need to be handled in a non-typical way, then you should also agree that trans people should be handled in a non-typical, atypical way. Both of those groups of people need treatments, need medical care that is specific to their situation. And this is true of everybody. This is true of all people. It's not like everybody just fits in these cookie cutter molds of how they develop biologically. And that's what medical science does, is it takes those things, tries to figure out how all the stuff works, and figures out what works for people with those various conditions. And then that's how treatment's determined. And so the treatment for trans people that is to transition, individual plans on how far they go and what they have, and the treatments for intersex people are also unique to their situation. And I don't know what all of them are. I just know that there's some unique situations going on there because they have different hormonal issues potentially, or different structural issues. So at the end of the day, like, both of these are variations. So just basically get your head out of your ass. Let's talk about myth number 4.
Romans 12. It says, therefore, I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. Be transformed, what? By the renewing of your mind. Again, let's go back to this. When mind and body are out of alignment, what the world says is listen to your mind and change your body. But here's what the word says. It says this, it says, embrace your body and renew your mind. By the power of his Holy Spirit can come into your life and begin to renew your mind and bring your mind in alignment with your fixed biological reality. This is not just Christians saying this. This is a quote from Dr. Paul McHugh, a Johns Hopkins psychologist. This is what he says. He says, treatment should not be directed at the body as with surgery and hormones any more than one treats obesity-fearing anorexic patients with liposuction. The treatment should strive to correct the false, problematic nature of the assumption.
One of the things you see in that clip is a pastor using faith-based reasoning and debunked and bogus science to try to justify what their perspective on what medical science should actually be advocating for, changing the mind instead of the body. The problem with that is that attempts to change the mind have been shown over and over and over again, not only to be ineffective and not achieve the result that they're trying to achieve, but to actually push people further into depression and that's crazy. And it has also been shown that the alternative, changing the body through hormone replacement therapy, sex reassignment surgery, facial feminization surgery, and the equivalent trans men surgeries, and a variety of surgeries and medical treatments around affirming a trans person's gender, those have a really high success rate. 99% success rate of sex reassignment surgery is off the charts. Like, there are very few surgeries in the world that have such a low regret rate as that surgery. And it has been shown over and over and over again to increase mental well-being, decrease risk of negative effects, and trans people who go through that live better lives. That's just the fact of reality, which is why all of the medical organizations worldwide recommend the affirmative approach, and a lot of them follow the WPATH guidelines to make sure that people who are trans get the support they need. And so no amount of this religious speak or this religious posturing is going to change that reality. So please stop using your religious faith to justify your bigotry. It's disgusting, frankly. So that brings us to myth number 5, that sex is identified rather than assigned, which actually, ironically, it's really ironic that they use the word identified, because it's actually the same root as the word of me identifying as a woman, that my self-identity is me identifying my gender, what my internal experience is to the external world. But anyway, let's get back to identification of gender or sex.
When somebody is born, listen, their sex is identified, not assigned.
An issue with this is that the doctor's actually operating or observing the situation with incomplete information. Like when the doctor looked at me and assigned me male at birth, he doesn't know what my brain structures are like at the time. They don't do brain scans of infants like that. The doctor's operating from incomplete information. And when there are ambiguities in the genitals, like they assign one of the genders based on what they think is most appropriate for the situation. And then the assignment is on the legal documentation, your birth certificate, and like all the things that follow on from that. You know, you could argue semantics, but it's not like, it is not this reality that the medical doctor is identifying some objective truth about what you are like and what your sex is. About 1% of the population is trans, and they got that information wrong from a gender perspective. I mean, that's why we even talk about sex reassignment surgery, is because you are reassigning your sex to a different sex. Where does that leave us? Like, it leaves me really frustrated with people like my dad and like this pastor who are using faith and pseudoscience essentially to justify their bigotry against me and other people like me. I'm here today walking among these beautiful flowers as a trans woman living my best life. So frankly, get your mind out of my crotch. You don't need to know what my chromosomes are or what's between my legs. Instead, why don't you just join me in being a neighbor to those around you and making this world a better place?